Afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone ate well and enjoyed lunch conversation. We are reconvening for our afternoon panels, beginning with Black Archives, moderated by Ms. Daphne Muse, who is our elder in residence of the Abolition and Democracy Fellows Program, the Black Studies Collaboratory. And in many ways, this panel is inspired by a really incredible public event that Ms. Muse organized in the spring around Black Archives. And so we're really thrilled to welcome our three panelists today under the great care of Ms. Daphne Muse.
Good afternoon. I am delighted to see all of this Black brilliance and intelligence and joy in this room. And I'll tell you, the Black diaspora is rolling and jamming at Berkeley. I started first seeing it here in 1972, and it has emerged as a real force. So I am tickled black to be amongst you and to be facilitating this panel. I'd also like to just make a point of reference regarding archiving. I call archiving historical receipts. So when people say, no, that didn't, you whip out these marvelous receipts, the music, the science, the art, the history, all documented in so many different genres. So this afternoon, we have the pleasure of hearing some of the work that these young archivists are doing and bringing to the table. We have Khalid Dawson, a graduate student in the School of Education, Alexander Ullman, a graduate student in the English department, and Nejat Kedir, a graduate student in African American and African Diaspora Studies. So we will start with you, Nejat.
So much. All right. I am gonna switch between reading and showing a few things I found in the archive. So I guess it's gonna have two parts. One, I'll talk about how my dissertation connects to the archive, and then in part two, I'll kind of show what I found in the archive. Okay, here's an overview. So my dissertation has two parts. Part one deals with the question of consciousness, self-consciousness, and the negation of the African from humanity, which destabilizes how we think about personhood, sociality, and freedom. Part two deals with the set of problematics that the Haitian Revolution poses to our conception of historical consciousness, imagined community, and the meaning of the nation state when the heads of the state change, i.e. when you have Black leaders, while the international order of politics remains deeply entrenched within a colonial framework. In both parts of the dissertation, I explore how the Middle Passage, slavery, and coloniality in the New World informs how violence plays a role in giving coherence to a concept such as mutual recognition, alienation, nature, and labor. In order to explode these terms, like when we say self-consciousness or alienation or nature, in order to explode the kind of neutrality and universality as both given and natural to these terms, I turn to theoretical and creative texts that emerge in the 19th and 20th century. I draw from Black Atlantic literature as well as contemporary Black feminist theorists, texts such as Sylvia Wynter's unpublished manuscript, Black Metamorphosis, which is what I found in the archive, and Dion Brand's A Map to the Door of No Return. In a lot of ways, it's this quote that drew me to these question of like, how is consciousness already always racialized and gendered? So yeah, Dion Brand's text. So I draw from these confluences of texts challenge 19th century political philosophy texts that articulate consciousness, collective consciousness, ethical life, by taking coloniality in 1492 as a point of departure rather than an afterthought or a metaphorical term such as like the term master-slave dialectic does. I demonstrate how Black feminist texts such as Dion Brand's A Map to Door of No Return and Sylvia Wynter's body of work mutate these epistemic claims and note that slavery's absence from these accounts impoverishes and distorts how we understand the very nature of aesthetic, epistemology, and history itself. Following Wynter and Brand, I argue that Black feminist texts in the 19th century and 20th century were not just calling for material shift, but were also calling for a different order of consciousness itself. This call is made evident in the aesthetic practices, art, literature, performance, our aesthetic practices that Black feminists are engaging using alternative forms to produce art itself. For Wynter, Black consciousness is at its best not only challenges the dominant order of consciousness, but negates the very structure and logic of the value system the order institutes. For Brand, however, I think coming to terms with how slavery and the Door of No Return colors our very conception of consciousness is like, what is at stake? Using the research fund, I've traveled to two archival sites that housed Sylvia Wynter's paper, one in Ann Arbor, Michigan at the University of Michigan Bentley Historic Library, and another one in New York at the Schomburg Center for Black Life. So the paper I found in the Historic Library archive contained a paper she presented at a working group in Michigan titled African Peoples in the Industrial Age, and it was part of a working group that was called the Remapping of Scholarship, African Peoples in the Industrial Age. And that was like in September 30th to October 1st, 1994. I think this paper, like knowing Sylvia Wynter's work, it was like the earlier iteration of the now published essay, Unsettling the Coloniality of Being, and you can really see her thinking, which Unsettling Coloniality was published in the early 2000s, and so she'd been working on it for about a decade, or almost a decade. So Wynter's manuscript, Black Metamorphosis, New Natives in a New World, is massive at 876 pages, and it explores the place of the African in the New World, specifically the Caribbean, offering a new account of the place of the African by using the term new indigenization. In the manuscripts, Wynter locates culture as a site for actualization and crystallization of Black and New World consciousness. She writes that alienated consciousness produces alienated beings, and she draws from Ralph Ellison, Fanon, Caribbean dance and rituals, Spanish literature, plays to argue for a diasporic conception of land, labor, culture, and consciousness itself that takes the figure of the slave as a central analytic or as a central framework. So the manuscript has three large arguments or parts. Part one, I'm like kind of reframing it. The manuscript itself has like some missing pages. But so for me, reading the whole, it contains three parts. Part one is about aesthetics and how enslaved people in the Caribbean and the American produced unique cultural and aesthetic practices. So she does this by arguing that the cultural production of the African in the New World, such as the blues and jazz, is a reflection of the material and existential condition of the first modern people of the Western Hemisphere. She conceptualizes blues music as being from the ancestors from the spirit world. She writes, quote, the exiled slaves sent back messages not only to the spirit world, but to Africa, and the message was a message of exile. The message invented its medium, the blues, end of quote. So part two kind of deals with questions of like the category of, this is from the 70s, so like she's engaging in these debates about whether or not there's like a culture that, whether or not the quote unquote the Negro has a culture, right? So that's what she's responding to that. And then the other kind of debate that she's responding to is like the Marxist category of labor and how it fails to give an account of enslaved labor. For her, it's inadequate. It has an inadequate conception of nature. She returns to the Maroons and Maroonage conceptualization of nature to demonstrate that limit. she writes about the maroons, how the maroons for the plantation owners symbolized animality because it negated Christian principles and civilizational discourse. And most importantly, the maroons for plantation owners also really pose a threat for any conception of property. And so she kind of takes the maroons as an important central figure to rethinking about nature in different ways. And then part 3 kind of deals with revolt, rebellion, alienation, etc. Okay, so I'm gonna show you a few, so that's like kind of the overall. I'm gonna show a few things that I found in Winter's archive that gave me a different understanding of who she is beyond the text. And one of the things that I found that was wonderful was the correspondence that she had with people like St. Clair Drake, Vincent Harding, and people who worked at the Institute for Black World while she was trying to get the manuscript to be published in the 70s. So yeah, this personal correspondence were really wonderful, and it also showed that she had a life, that she was traveling between Jamaica, England, and the United States, and East Coast and West Coast, and was taking part in different intellectual and cultural circles. Okay. All right. Oh, okay. I actually forgot. This is from the Schomburg, the archive, the manuscript, rare books and manuscript. Let me just make this wider. Okay, so 876 pages was like divided into 3 different boxes. And so this is the earlier draft. I don't know if you can see the title. So the earlier iteration of the manuscript was called After the Middle Passage Towards an Interpretation of the Black Experience in the Americas. So this is from the early 1970s. And then she keeps on editing and reworking it. And then I think it was Vincent Harding who suggested the title Black Metamorphosis. This is in the correspondence, right? Like, so they read the draft and they give her feedback. So she changes it to Black Metamorphosis, New Natives in a New World sometime in the 70s. And then this is a letter that Sharon, who was her editor, wrote. And she was just like talking about how wonderful the piece is. Can you all read this, or should I magnify it? And just like really urging her coworkers in the Institute for Black Life to go ahead and publish it. And I don't know why the manuscript wasn't published, because people, I mean, like Sharon, were really excited about it. But I think a few things happened. Sharon, who was the primary editor, leaves the Institute, and then someone else has to come in and like kind of restart the process of editing it again. And I think, I don't know why it wasn't published. That was like a question I had. And also, she's such a perfectionist. She kept editing and changing it. I think that might have played a role in why it wasn't published. But I mean, I don't know Sylvia Wynter. That was the sense I got from like looking at these revisions. There were 2, like the first 200 pages had 3 different stages or drafts, 3 different drafts. Okay. All right, and then after Sharon leaves, the next editor that comes in was Julian, and this is like a letter letting her know that Julian was going to be the new like person / point of contact. I think that's all I have. Okay.
Thank you. Khalid?
Hey everybody, how y'all doing? Hey. Okay, let's see. I'm really excited about the prospect of getting to have this conversation with Ms. Muse, so I'm gonna be brief. Black Lives at Cal, that is the initiative on which I'm presenting today. I have had the pleasure of leading and kind of organizing this initiative. There's so many people who are a part of it, and that's why the first slide kind of shows you a collage of these great people. First of all, I want to give a quick shout out to Gia White, who's here, who's one of our steering committee members, longtime alumni. She's on our steering committee alongside Takia Jackson, Stephen Small, and Laura McCreary, who have different roles from oral historian to director of ISSI and director of AASD, the African American Student Development Office. And then you also see here on the top right, Natasha Ford, who is a phenomenal archivist and librarian from our African American Studies department, and is another graduate student researcher working with me. And then the other photos are the undergraduate research assistants. We started with 3 in the fall and then had 6 in the spring. I think 7 in the summer now. I think we might have 12. I'm getting back to some folks soon. But yeah, this is the beautiful thing that is Black Lives at Cal. Our mission is to research, preserve, and publicize the legacy of Black folk. And we think about that really expansively. So we think about that as undergraduate students, graduate students, staff, faculty, administrators, alumni, anyone who we could possibly think of as affiliated with the University of California, Berkeley, and all the stories that get tethered in as we can think about that. So it may be talking about their impact at UC Berkeley. It could be thinking about all the folk who are from West Oakland and what their impact was in West Oakland or beyond. So there's so many ways that we can spin, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about it. Our legacy as Black folk, tethered to this institution, like exceed it so capaciously. So research, preserve, and publicize. Part of that has been archival work, which I've been really excited to bring on Natasha Ford to be leading us in, but we also have, in addition to our research initiative or our research component or team, we also do special projects and content creation. And so I'll kind of give a quick overview of that. But before I move on, I just want to note that this work gets done through mentored research opportunities between Black grad students like myself and Natasha with undergraduate research assistants. So that's a really cool part of this. And I think one of the things that I love most about this, and that reminds me most of Black studies, is that what we're doing is not only building a Black-centered and Black life, like an institution of Black life, in terms of what we're oriented towards, but also in building it, we want it to build up the people who are part of it. So to continue a little bit further with some of our shout outs, Daniela Lake, who's, right here, is a media studies major and is gonna work with Gia White on our podcast, and she'll get to tell you more about that with the audio tour. But it's super cool to me that in addition to her doing work with us, she's also getting some professional development and career readiness to, pursue her dreams from like being a talk show host to a journalist. Or Skylar has an interest in being in working in DEI spaces and trying to recruit more people of color, Black folk into the tech sector. And we were able to support her getting a job at the Career Center. So in addition to working with us, she's also in those sort of spaces, doing work that's really gonna extend her. And then just today, I found out that one of our new students who's not on this list yet, or on this collage, is gonna be part of the Veve Clark and really benefited from working with us as a way to prepare her to step into that role. Into some of the work. So our initiative really is the beginning stages. Last year was our first year existing, and I'm really proud to say that we've done some really amazing work. Part of that is archival, and part of it is also building capacity to do more archival work. But some of the things that we're really excited about and that you'll see in the future is that, in the fall, we're trying to take inventory and take account of all that we already might have access to through UC Berkeley. So we were looking at we're using the online archive of California for folk to find out what's in Bancroft Library, what's in the university archives, and what's at the African American Museum and Library of Oakland that's about the legacy of Black folk. And so affiliated with UC Berkeley. So we're having them search certain terms to catalog them. Okay, when you look them up, like what did you find? What are some things that you're interested in learning more about? And we found more than 100 relevant collections using the Online Archive of California that we know are about Black folk at Berkeley, whether their time here or beyond. And so that's one thing that we're really excited for students in this year to continue exploring, and to, now that we're in a less precautious state in the pandemic, getting to visit some of these places and these sites to go through them, because the work that they did see, or while using this online tool, the Online Archive of California, we're able to get a kind of a surface level assessment of what might be the contents of this. But they're going to get to go through and work with these materials. We also know and are excited to have been celebrating the 100-year anniversary of some of the Black Greek letter organizations at UC Berkeley. Three of our chapters have celebrated their 100-year anniversaries. And they have really rich histories of Black life. They have really rich histories, I'll just say that. And so we're really excited about tracing their histories as a way to trace the legacy of Black folk at UC Berkeley. And then through this collaboration that we've had with the department and through Black Studies Collaboratory, we know we have access to African American Studies Department newsletters as one archival source, Black grad videos, which I know the initiative is really eager to see digitized, handbooks from the African American Student Development Office from the 90s, Black student publications as early as the 70s. And these are some of the materials that we're going to be able to tell stories from, and for folk to know that even though, for example, right now we don't have a Black student newspaper, there have been upwards of 6 or 7 since the 70s. And we're really excited to have those digitized and available for folk to learn more about. Briefly, I want to say of some of the things that are significant. I've already kind of mentioned that this contributes to Black history at UC Berkeley, but really beyond, because the scope of people who come to Berkeley, where they come from and where they go and what they do is so much beyond UC Berkeley. So it's certainly to tell that history and to preserve it better for not only what has happened, but what's happening currently, right? So from the Black Studies Collaboratory to the Afro floor expanding from 45 to 80 students who are in residence there. Those are some of the histories that we're really excited to preserve for the future and collaborate with different initiatives and departments to do that well. We know that this meaningfully facilitates recruitment, retention, alumni engagement, so much more. So we're eager to siphon every single dime of university resources that are going to those things in order to continue building this Black institution. And then I've mentioned the mentored research opportunities. And this to me is so important because we've been able to, with some of the early funds that we've received, support hiring Black grad students. And our model is the more Black grads we have, the more undergraduates we can bring on this fall. I believe we'll have 3, if not 4 Black grad students, which is what enables us to bring on more undergraduate students, and so that we have capacity to support them rather than this being our 3rd or 4th job where we don't have, where it's our 50 to 60th hour of the week that we're working versus our maybe our 30th. That's drastically different in terms of quality of work and the capacity that we can dedicate to supporting students well. And then also, we give credit and compensation where they're due. So students are able to get course credit through the UNIREP initiative or UREP program for the work that they do with us. And then we've also used some of the funding to support students over the summer doing more full-time work with us, whether building the website or whatnot, and building resource guides and listing what are all the Black organizations that are currently on campus, who are their organizational leaders, who are before them and before them and before them, what are the organizational structure. We're also interested in helping, for example, some of the Black student organizations preserve their history so that when people are transitioning from year to year, they know what happened before and how they did it. So in addition to, telling stories of the past, by preserving the present, we think that people in the future will be better served by our institutions, and that people doing this work to build up our community now will have a less adverse and uphill battle to continue that work going forward. Lastly, we have one of the things we were working on this year was to develop a website, black.berkeley.edu. So if you use your QR code, you can scan that, but you can also check it out. We're kind of in the first phase of the website where the website gives an overview of what we're doing as an initiative. The next phase of the website, we're really excited to profile some folk currently on campus and their journeys here, alumni who've come through, key dates in the history of Black folk at the university, and include things like our podcast and timeline and so much more. So this is really the beginning, and I want y'all to know that we're building capacity to do so much more. And that's what I'm really proud of, what we're working towards and how we're doing it together.
Alexander Ullman.
I'm Alex. I'm honored to be and very humbled to be in this space and invited into this space. I speak softly, so I'll speak louder. Just tell me if I'm speaking too softly. I'm in the English department, but I also write about sound and I write about performance, mostly how people talk to each other. So my project was to conduct archival research for my dissertation, which is about Black and Jewish relationships. And so I started with the question, kind of problematic, complicated, essentialist questions around what does a Black person sound like, what does a Jewish person sound like, and coming up with more complicated answers by listening to actual conversations. And so when I applied for the grant, I wanted to, it was focused around 4 interracial relationships. Audre Lorde and Adrienne Rich were poets. Anna Devere Smith and radio host Studs Terkel. Playwrights Tony Kushner and George C. Wolfe, who's a playwright and also director. And Toni Morrison, her editor, Robert Gottlieb. So the grant afforded me time to begin to study Morrison's manuscripts at Princeton, as well as to travel to the New York Public Library to study Wolfe's plays. And it's not part of the Schoenberg Center, but at the New York Public Library, they have a theater on film and television archive, which I learned about, which you can basically watch anything that was on or off Broadway between 1980 and now. And it's a really powerful archive. But most of the money and time was devoted to going to Spelman College and looking at the Audre Lorde archive. So the archive there helped my project in at least two ways. First, with the help of archivist Holly Smith, I found hundreds of relevant letters written from Adrienne Rich to Audre Lorde. The two were friends for 25 years, from 1968, when they both taught at CUNY, until Lorde's death in 1992. But they were also peers who performed together very often, especially between 1978 and 1982. In an undated letter from 1979, Rich asks Lorde if she has any thoughts on, quote, poetry readings, audience response, knee-jerk applause, and standing ovations, and that kind of thing. And then again, in the lower right corner, again, December 18th, 1990, about the effect, quote, that readings or public presence have on the poems that we write, unquote. Rich's archive is closed until 2050. You're not allowed to read the letter, so we can't read what Lorde wrote in response. But the second way that traveling to Spelman helped me was that you can kind of hear how Lorde may have responded. And I spent most of the week listening closely to, there's over 163, or about 163 audiovisual recordings at the archive that had never been written about, and they tell a much different history about Lorde's public engagement and her performance practice. So I started with thinking about this moment in the 1995 documentary on Lorde's life, which features a clip of her speaking about her voice towards the end of her life, the past few months, when it changed dramatically because cancer had affected her vocal tract. And I was kind of haunted and also really inspired by what she says here about her voice and how it's changed.
I always counted on my voice, being able to read my poetry back, to hear it in a certain way, and the hearing would connect inside of me with the feeling, and that's part of the structure and technique. And I don't have that because I hear differently now.
This is a very powerful sort of statement about vocal technique and listening technique, suggesting that speaking actually is a kind of listening, and that affect is what connects those two, and the question of disability as well. So her first recorded reading was in 1970 on WGBH radio on a program called The Poet Speaks. And her final reading was in 1992 on September 20th in the living room of her friends in Berlin, just weeks before her death. So there's about a 22-year period of a recording history and a performance history. So I started in the middle at the archive, thinking in 1981, at a reading that she gave with Adrienne Rich, and I wanted to listen to what was happening with her voice, how it changed until 1992, and then back to 1970, and really just trying to track how it changed. Here's a poem. I don't know if we have time, if we can listen to this whole poem. It's about 30 seconds. It's just an excerpt from Sequelae, which is published in the Black Unicorn in 1978, but performed here in 1981. And so this is what her performance practice sounds like in 1981.
Because a burning sword notches both of my doorposts, because I am standing between my burned hands in the ash print of two different houses, midnight finds weave a filigree of disorder. I figure in the dreams of people who do not even know me. The night is a blister of stars pierced by nightmares of a telephone ringing. My hand is the receiver, threatening as an uncaged motor, seductive as the pain of voiceless mornings, voiceless kitchens. I remember cornflakes shrieking like banshees in my throat, while I battle the shapes of you wearing old ghosts of me, hating you for being black and not woman, hating you for being white and not me. In this carnival of memories, I name you both the laying down of power, the separation I cannot yet make.
There for the sake of time, but sorry. But there's a lot of things to say about this poem, but the performance really was, there's three different registers that I could identify that were happening. It starts out in what is called this kind of like conversational register. It sounds like her everyday speaking voice. And then in the middle, we can listen to these two if there's time, but she dips into this kind of incantatory voice in which it decedes chromatically like this. And then towards the end, it gets into this vibrato. She actually sings, effectively singing some of the lines. And you can kind of see, I guess the point of what I found in the archive was that, yeah, we'll talk about how this is silly at the same time. But in 1970, it's more the conversational, and by 1990, she's often singing and speaking complete and reading her poems completely in the vibrato register. So there's more to talk about there, but the archive was incredible, and I'd say there were many challenges to the project. The first being identity-based, and the other disciplinary, and so there was a lot, I think, of necessary and important anxiety I had about, you know, working between the gap between my identity and that of the subject matter, which is Lord's voice. And when I named these differences up front to the archivists at Spelman, and I told them about the aims of my larger project, they were largely supportive, and they wanted people to use the archives. And there was also a housing strike that week that I was at Spelman. And so I kind of bonded with the work-study student over what was happening with regards to the housing there, which was a year-long housing crisis, but as the geographers will tell us, is a decades-long problem, especially in Atlanta. And the second challenge was simply writing about sound, which kind of came up in the sound panel, but also the geography panel, which was whenever we try to visualize it, there's a risk of kind of reducing certain, certain epistemologies or embodied knowledges to the realm of the visual, capturing them in prose or in musical notation, or in what I did was like pitch tracking software. So this struggle between Western epistemologies and racialized logics was also part of Lord's challenge to typical poetry readings and how they went. And so it kind of went into some of that in the paper that I'm trying to write. And I tried to build that problem into the essay because it was part of the issues around her live performance as well. Thank you.
Well, before we start the Q&A, there are 3 points I'd like to raise. Nejat, if you go into Veve Clark's archive, you may find the answer to the question of why that manuscript was not published, because Clark and Winter worked very closely together. So that may be a source for you to dive into. Ullman, one of the things that struck me in your presentation is the embargoing of archive, that you all know that you are writing about people whose lives you do not have the full context for. You have to be clear about that. And on the one hand, it's unfortunate that you can't get all of the answers to the questions. But on the other hand, there's some stuff folks didn't want you to know for a spell. And it presents a precarious juxtaposition in terms of you trying to do the most in-depth research that you can. And for you, Callie, there are two people here who were here at the Berkeley campus that I clearly remember, one historically and one in real time. The historical person, I'm forgetting his name, but he was a Black mathematician who came to Berkeley in the 50s. And I don't know where his papers are, but in terms of the work that you're doing, you really need to take a deep dive into his work. And then for, there was a chair of the chemistry department, William Lester, who was a Black chemist here. And their stories will reflect on the history of Berkeley in terms of Black lives and cultures in ways that people don't necessarily dive into because they weren't a part of the general Black structure of the university. But I am deeply moved and impressed by this archival research. Anybody doing anything in archives just sends me over the moon. So one of the questions that I have for the panelists is, what's been your most revelatory archival moment? Something that absolutely shocked you that you didn't expect to find, or something that set your world on an entire differently trajectory, or was there a document or a piece of ephemera that turned your research in a whole different direction? I mean, did you find out that Sylvia went to ate Cheerios? I mean, something, it doesn't have to be something magnanimous. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be some grand moment, but even some micro moment that illuminated your thinking about her.
I guess, does this work? Okay, I guess I just like, how she lived a very international life, not just in the way she's thinking about diaspora and reconceptualizing like a relational notion of indigeneity, a different conception of culture that took different like both the Francophone Caribbean, the English Caribbean. She was thinking about that intellectually, but she was also living like and working like before she came to the US. She taught in the Caribbean at the University of West Indies for about a decade almost. She kept in touch with her colleagues there even after she moved here to the US, and I don't know. And I also like, okay, I think the revelatory was like there at Michigan, I found footages of her giving a talk from the 1970s, 1972 on CLR James. And it was wonderful to match this face, the sound, and the live person to, I don't know, when I read it, I have like a sound of what I think she sounds like. I don't know, that was wonderful. There were a lot of wonderful things. It's just, yeah.
Khalid?
I'll just jump in real quick. I have a few like short and really fun things. I've been talking to a handful of alumni who have like, oh, we used to pass down this hard drive from Afrofloor to Afrofloor, and it has like hundreds of pictures. I don't know who got it now, but that's out there somewhere. So I'm really excited to find that hard drive. Let's see. I was recently talking to Jarvis, who's an Professor Jarvis, who's at Harvard right now, and he is an alumni of the department. And he, in preparing for the Alpha Centennial celebration, was telling me that Du Bois wrote to the history department trying to find out if there were Black students there who could be research assistants in some project related to California. I haven't found that yet, but I heard of that, and I'm super excited because for me, some of the earliest places that I know to look for Black history as early as the 20s is some of the Black Greek letter organizations, and that predates that. So that to me is super exciting. The answer from what Jarvis was talking was no, not people in the major, but there are people who took some Black folk who are taking courses in the department that I think he might have been recommending. Another random fun one, when I'm thinking about the capaciousness of this and like who all can we tell the story about? My grandma did her master's in community health nursing at UCSF, but because UCSF and Berkeley have always been affiliated through their School of Public Health, my grandma took classes at Cal as well. And I was able to find through Google Scholar, the graduation book from my grandma in 1956 or something like that. So to me, there's all these cool traces that, and cool leads that we can explore.
If I'm not mistaken, and I'll fact check this to make sure that my thinking is correct on this, Du Bois' personal secretary had a staff position here at Berkeley. I don't know whether she was in a clerical, I don't know, I don't recall what it was. I met her once, but that might be a link to something that you are, the focus of what you're doing. Mr. Ullman?
I'd say even just learning about this theater archive that I didn't really talk about, that was in New York, that was powerful just to know that there was film, that there's an agreement with the Actors Equity Union that one thing could be filmed and one thing can be preserved, and that's you can only watch it once. But at Lord's Archive, I think there's one poem that she writes in 1978 that's about, it's called Need, a Chorale for Black Voices. And she says that it's connected to live performance, that the edits in it changed because of the way that I read it out loud. And in the archive, the harpist helped me find, and I brought with 3 drafts of the poem and how they changed and trying to track them next to the live readings. That was mind-blowing.
I think the other thing that your generation also, or generations, have to keep in mind is if you don't read cursive, you need to learn to read cursive, because in order to dive into these archives and read these letters and read these manuscripts, you have got to be able to read cursive. And I don't know that there is a translator for cursive like there is for French or German or Kiswahili, but you have to. It is a skill that you absolutely must have, along with the linguistics of an era, because you're going to run into rhetoric of the 60s and 70s, and not just the 1960s and 70s, but the 1860s and 70s, where you will need lexicons to translate the discourse that is taking place in the correspondence, in the manuscripts, in the books, so that you really have a fuller understanding of what it is that you are researching. And if you don't, I'm gonna come after you. So, questions from the audience? Yes.
I'm Paul Lee. I'm a visiting scholar in the African American Studies Department. Caleb, I was just introduced to you 2 weeks ago. How you doing, black man? I missed part of your presentation, so I wanted to ask, were you aware of certain sources? Have you contacted the Berkeley Historical Society?
That's on the list.
Okay, the Berkeley Historical Society saved nothing on us. Mm-hmm. I'm from Berkeley, and they didn't consider us important enough to save anything. But some former students and white radicals donated their papers there. And I recently was taken to the back rooms, and I was astonished to find unprocessed newspapers, magazines, and rich ephemera, including flyers. Mm-hmm. So please stop by there, but you're gonna have to make the interpretation yourself, because these white people don't know and they don't care. Have you used the Berkeley Revolution website put together by Scott Saul?
Not that one, no.
Very rich. You're gonna find a lot of the stuff you're looking for already there. I'll send this list to you if you'd like. Have you used the Bay Area Television Archive?
Nope, not yet.
This is at San Francisco State. They, in case you're wondering why I know all this, I am from here, but I left for 15 years. And when I came back 6 years ago, I found that the black spaces that I knew had disappeared or were fast disappearing. And so one of the things my then department chair, Eula Taylor, asked me to do is begin a documentation project. And out of that came an exhibit that I've been working on called A Place of Our Own. In West Berkeley, where I grew up, although they're described as majority black districts, they were actually majority non-white. We had Asian Americans, Latino Americans, or Latinx Americans, and also unusually indigenous Americans. My elementary school, Lincoln, which is now Malcolm X, was majority African American, majority Japanese American. And so I'm reconstructing these communities as fast as I can. So I'm running across a lot of sources that will be helpful to you. The Bay Area Television Archive is at San Francisco State, and the local television stations are essentially dumping their old 16 millimeter films there. And you're gonna find a lot of rich stuff, including on the Third World Liberation Front. One of the places that I found the richest records on Cal, what was happening here, is in the attics, closets, basements, and garages of former students. And also Black Berkeleans. So please, don't just go to archives, talk to the people. Have you been using Black Bay Area newspapers such as the Oakland Post, which was originally published in South Berkeley? They were very tuned to what was happening on campus.
Excuse me, it sounds like the twos of you need to confer over a 4-hour meal.
I want to make one more suggestion. Have you heard the term derivative history?
Derivative history, okay.
White people created this about 20 years ago. Derivative history means when your history is embedded in somebody else's. So in Oklahoma, the indigenous peoples supposedly didn't keep their own written records, so you'll find them in the Bureau of the Indian Affairs. In the case of Cal, you're gonna find rich records on what was happening on this campus in right-wing magazines and newspapers because they considered what was happening here a threat. But I got a list here and I'll be glad to share it with you. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And I'll say the beautiful thing about this is that we are building capacity to bring in people who have varied expertise. My training is primarily as an ethnographer and a qualitative researcher, and that's why we bring in folk like Natasha, who's an archivist. And the three sets that we begin is only the beginning. And so we're really excited for y'all to continue to let us know more leads that we have. And we have an email that you can find on our website, but it's black_research, BLAC_research at berkeley.edu. And you can also talk with me and I can share my contact information because we love the leads. So thank you.
And another rich source is the morgues of newspapers. Newspapers are dumping their they have archival material up the wazoo, photographs, articles, recordings as well. So for those of you who have not tapped into it, you should do it as quickly as possible because literally they're dumping them in the garbage. Someone else, there was another question.
Hi, everybody. Gia White. I'm on the steering committee for Black, and I just wanted to add a quick comment, and that is that Caleb Dawson is incredible. And what I witnessed on being on the steering committee and sort of going in on the meetings that Caleb would have with the undergraduate research students is that he mentored them so well on how to conduct research. And it's in a safe place with someone who cared, someone who had their backs, who had their best interest at heart. And I saw how they really flourished. So I just want to give shout out to Caleb. And just for that experience for undergraduate researchers, it's incredible. So just wanted to say that quickly.
And another source that's right here in Berkeley, near the Monterey Market, is the Freedom Archives. That place is you go once and then you find yourself there 13 more times. I'd like to ask, how do you see, given the distances that have now been established, the unfortunate distances between the digital world and the pre-digital world, how do you bridge that in terms of your relationship? Because when people talk about research, they just say, oh, Google it. I do not tell anybody to Google it. You research it. You explore it. But every time you say Google it, Google gets another $50 million in their coffers. And it is not the only place to research. So how are you all? I'll start with you, Alexander. How are you bridging that divide between researching in the digital world and researching hard copy, old school, things that even people discount, like the church fan? What has a church fan to do with anybody's history? Well, it has a lot. So how are you navigating that?
This question came up for me too during the space panel, because where the one question was about the material and the poetic and how you balance them, especially because the archival material here was about voice, which is both a kind of trope and it's something we also speak. It's an embodied practice. So my approach was to kind of be radically inclusive, and like, if there's I wanted to see what was useful. So if there was a digital way to think about sound, I would try to use it and grapple with it, see what was its use, and if there was I think also going to the archive and really holding the documents too is a very powerful thing, because that is an embodied experience. And looking at the different different pen colors that were used, because writing is also a sound technology. It also records emotion and history. So really being physically present, being close and distant, and with the digital stuff. I've tried to embrace them all, see what their use is, and then discard them if I find them unhelpful.
Nejat?
This is my first time like going into the archive. I was like honestly pleasantly surprised to see like the very texture, the color of the paper was like different, like yellowish, and then also when like multiple papers are attached, the what is the clip that connects the two? Like
Paper clip.
the paper clip.
Oh yes, dear, the paper clip.
The paper clip
That
was like
ancient holder.
Some of the paper clips were so attached that they have sunk into the paper. And so I just like both the precarity of the material thing, you can feel time passing. I don't know, it does something, but I'm not sure I fully understand what it does. And also carbon paper.
Oh, yes.
Carbon paper, I was just like I was like, it's very precarious, and you have to take care of it. And I don't know, I ended up walking away feeling very grateful that institutes and centers like the Schomburg exist to take care of these papers.
We'll mix it up about all of that. The paper clip and carbon paper. All right, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panelists for bringing us such a rich harvest of their research, and I look forward to the rest of this afternoon's presentations. Thank you very much.